"If they find us, please protect my sister," the boy cried. And the Comanche warrior said, "No one gets past me." New Mexico Territory, late autumn of 1873. The air was sharp and dry, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that never quite arrived. The plateau stretched wide and endless, dotted with juniper and pinon pine, their twisted shapes casting thin shadows across the red earth. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the mesas in shades of copper and gold. The land here was unforgiving, beautiful in its cruelty, silent in its judgment. It swallowed the weak and remembered the strong, and it had seen more blood than most men could bear to imagine. The wind moved through the canyon in whispers, carrying secrets older than memory, older than the white man's arrival, older than the wars that had torn this territory apart. Cale Stoneheart moved through the canyon, like a shadow given form. His moccasins made no sound against the stone. His leather vest hung loose over his chest, beaded with turquoise and bone. Marks of his people, marks of survival. A rifle rested across his back, a knife at his hip. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind and time, scarred along the jaw from a blade that had tried and failed to kill him years before. His eyes, dark as obsidian, missed nothing. They had seen too much to ever rest easy again. They had watched friends fall, watched villages burn, watched promises turn to ash. And so he had chosen solitude, choosing the company of stone and sky over the pain of losing what he loved. He had been tracking deer for 2 days, following signs most men would never see. A broken twig here bent at just the right angle. A scrape in the dust there, where hooves had disturbed the earth. The faint press of tracks in the dry creek bed, subtle but unmistakable to eyes trained since childhood. The animal had been moving south, toward the river where the water still ran clear and cold, where the cottonwoods grew thick and the grass was still green despite the approaching winter. Kyle needed the meat. Winter was coming, and he had learned long ago that preparation was the difference between survival and a shallow grave. The seasons showed no mercy to the unprepared, and Kyle had survived too long to make foolish mistakes now. But now, something else caught his attention. Not animal tracks, human, small, erratic. Kyle crouched low, his fingers brushing the earth with the reverence of a man reading sacred text. 2 sets of prints. One larger, the stride of a child perhaps 7 or 8 years old. The weight distribution uneven, favoring the left leg as if injured or exhausted. The other set was smaller, lighter, the footprints of a much younger child, dragging in places as if being pulled or carried. They weaved through the dust, staggering desperate, the pattern of people running for their lives. Blood dotted the stone in dark, dried drops. Fresh enough to still hold color, the deep rust brown of blood exposed to air, but not yet fully oxidized. Old enough to tell him they had been running for hours, maybe since dawn, maybe longer. The blood trail was inconsistent, sometimes heavy, sometimes sparse, indicating the wound was serious, but the person was still moving. Cale traced the path with his eyes, following it up the canyon toward the narrowing walls ahead. He rose slowly, his joints protesting slightly from days of tracking, and scanned the ridge above. Nothing moved. The sky was vast and empty, painted in the warm colors of late afternoon. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, its cry sharp and distant. But beneath that sound, quieter, almost invisible beneath the wind, was another sound, a whimper. Soft, broken, carried on the breeze, like the cry of a wounded animal. It was the sound of a child in pain, trying desperately not to make noise, trying to hide from something terrible. Kyle's jaw tightened. He shifted the rifle from his back into his hands, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency, loaded, ready. He moved forward, his movements silent and deliberate, every step carefully placed to avoid disturbing loose stones or dry brush. His instincts, honed by years of war and survival, told him something was very wrong. This was not the track of lost children wandering aimlessly. This was the track of children fleeing, and when children fled like this, something monstrous was usually chasing them. The canyon narrowed ahead, walls rising steep and sheer on either side. The stone dark red and ancient. The shadows deepened, cool and damp where the sun could not reach, where moisture still clung to the rock face from the last rain weeks ago. The stone here was ancient, carved by water and wind over countless generations, layer upon layer of sediment compressed into solid rock. His people had walked these paths long before the white settlers came, long before the forts and the treaties and the broken promises that followed. They had hunted here, sheltered here, painted their stories on these walls. This land remembered. It always remembered. And there, huddled beneath an overhang of red rock, partially hidden by a twisted juniper that somehow grew from a crack in the stone, he saw them. 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy was on his knees, cradling the girl in his arms with a desperation that made Cale's chest tighten. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her face pale as death, her dress torn and stained with dirt and blood. The fabric had once been blue, perhaps a pretty Sunday dress, but now it was ruined, ripped at the hem, covered in dust and dark stains. The boy's shirt was ripped at the sleeve, his knees scraped raw and bleeding, his small hands trembling as he pressed a strip of cloth against the girl's arm, trying desperately to stop the bleeding that would not stop. The cloth was soaked through, dripping. The boy's eyes snapped up as Kyle approached, and terror flashed across his face, raw and primal and absolute. It was the look of a child who had seen death, who had watched it take everything he loved, and who expected it to come for him next. He scrambled backward, pulling his sister tighter against him, his small body trembling violently. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, his cheeks streaked with tears and dust. He could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old, but his eyes held the haunted look of someone far older, someone who had seen things no child should ever witness. War did that. Violence did that. It aged you before your time. Kyle stopped 10 feet away. He did not raise his weapon. He did not move closer. He simply stood there, letting the boy see him fully, letting him take in every detail, letting him decide. Trust was not something you demanded. It was something you earned, breath by breath, moment by moment. Kale understood this better than most. His people had learned it the hard way, through generations of broken treaties and empty promises. Words meant nothing. Only actions mattered. Please, the boy whispered, his voice raw and desperate, barely more than a rasp. Please don't hurt us. His voice cracked on the last word, dissolving into a sob that he tried desperately to swallow back down. Kale said nothing. He lowered the rifle slowly, deliberately, resting it against the rock beside him, where the boy could see it was no longer a threat. Then he knelt, bringing himself down to the boy's level, making himself smaller, less threatening. Still he did not speak. Words could lie, actions could not. He had learned that long ago, in a world that promised peace and delivered only pain and betrayal. The boy's breath hitched, coming in short, panicked gasps. He looked down at his sister, whose eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and uneven, each breath a struggle. Her arm hung limp at her side, a deep gash running from her elbow to her wrist, the edges ragged and torn, wrapped clumsily in a strip of cloth that had clearly been torn from the boy's own shirt. The makeshift bandage had soaked through with blood, dark and thick, and the blood seeped through his fingers no matter how hard he pressed. He was losing her. He knew it. Kyle knew it. Time was running out. She's dying, the boy said, his voice breaking completely, tears streaming down his face in rivers that cut through the dust and grime. I tried to help her. I tried, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know how to save her. His words dissolved into sobs, his small frame shaking with the weight of his fear and exhaustion and grief. He was just a child, carrying a burden no child should ever have to carry. Kale's eyes moved to the girl, studying her with the practiced assessment of someone who had treated battlefield wounds, who had seen death approach and sometimes, only sometimes, had been able to turn it away. She was small, fragile, her skin too pale, bloodless, her lips tinged with blue, from shock and blood loss. Fever burned in her cheeks, hot and dangerous, her forehead slick with sweat despite the cool air of the canyon. The wound was infected, the edges inflamed and angry red, the infection spreading outward in thin lines beneath her skin. Without help, she would not last the night, maybe not even the hour. The fever would take her, or the blood loss would, or the infection would poison her blood. Any of them could kill her. Kyle reached into the pouch at his belt, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather, tied with a strip of sinew. He unfolded it carefully, revealing strips of dried root, dark and gnarled, a vial of crushed herbs that smelled sharp and medicinal, and a needle threaded with sinew, prepared and ready. The boy watched, eyes wide with confusion and desperate hope, as Kyle held up the herbs and gestured toward the girl, his meaning clear even without words. His movements were slow, deliberate, non-threatening. He wanted the boy to understand that he was here to help, not to harm. "You want to help her?" the boy asked, voice trembling with disbelief, as if the concept of a stranger offering help was so foreign he could barely comprehend it. Gale nodded once, slow and firm, his expression steady and calm. The boy hesitated, his eyes darting between Kale and his sister, between this stranger and the only family he had left. She was fading fast. Her breaths were growing fainter, more labored, the pauses between them growing longer. He had no choice. He had nothing left but faith in a stranger. He nodded back, his trust fragile but real, offered with the desperation of someone who had run out of options. Kyle moved forward carefully, settling beside them on the hard stone ground. He gently took the girl's arm, his touch light and careful, and began unwrapping the blood-soaked cloth. The fabric stuck to the wound, dried blood acting as an adhesive, and he had to work slowly to avoid tearing the damaged flesh further. The wound was deep, jagged, as if she had been cut by something sharp and unforgiving, perhaps a broken branch or a sharp rock during her fall. Dirt and debris clung to the torn flesh, small pieces of grit embedded in the wound. The edges were inflamed, swollen, angry red, spreading outward in a clear sign of infection, taking hold. Kale worked quickly but carefully, pouring water from his canteen over the gash, washing away the filth and debris. The water ran red, then pink, then finally clear, as the worst of the contamination washed away. The girl stirred slightly, whimpering softly, a small sound of pain, but did not wake. Her body was too weak, too exhausted, too far gone to do even that. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. The boy watched every movement, his eyes following Kyle's hands with intense focus, as if by watching closely enough he could will his sister to live. "Are you going to hurt her?" he asked, his voice small and afraid. Kyle paused, meeting the boy's gaze directly. His expression was steady, calm, reassuring in a way words could never be. He understood the question, understood the fear behind it. Then he shook his head, slowly, deliberately. "No, I will not hurt her." The boy swallowed hard, nodding again, trusting in the only way a desperate child could. He had nothing left but hope, and hope was all Kyle was offering. But sometimes hope was enough. Kyle crushed the herbs between his fingers, the dried leaves crumbling into powder, mixing them with a small amount of water to form a thick paste. The scent was sharp and medicinal, bitter and earthy, familiar. His grandmother had taught him this long ago, before the world had changed, before the wars, before everything had been taken from him. She had been a healer, respected and sought after, and she had passed her knowledge to him with patient hands and gentle words. He had not thought about her in years, had pushed those memories down deep where they could not hurt him. But now, kneeling beside this dying child, her lessons came back to him as clearly as if she were standing beside him. He spread the paste over the wound, pressing it deep into the torn skin, working it into every crevice of the damaged flesh. The girl flinched, her face twisting in pain, a soft cry escaping her lips, but Kyle's hands were steady, his touch as gentle as it was precise. He had done this before, too many times on battlefields and in desperate moments, and he knew that sometimes healing required pain first. The herbs would fight the infection, draw out the poison, but they burned going in. Then he took the needle, pinching it between his fingers, and began to stitch, pulling the edges of the wound together with careful, practiced movements. The sinew threaded through skin and flesh, closing what had been torn open, bringing the ragged edges together. Each stitch was precise, evenly spaced, the work of someone who had done this countless times. The boy watched in silence, tears streaming down his face, but he did not look away. He needed to see this, needed to believe that someone could fix what had been broken, that the world was not all violence and loss. When it was done, Kyle wrapped the arm in clean cloth from his pack, tying it firm but not tight, allowing for swelling but providing enough pressure to help stop any remaining bleeding. He placed a hand on the girl's forehead, feeling the heat of the fever beneath his palm. It was high, dangerously so, her skin burning to the touch. The fever was the next battle, and it would be a hard one. He reached into his pouch again and pulled out a small bundle of willow bark, the inner bark stripped and dried. He handed it to the boy and gestured toward his mouth, demonstrating by miming the act of chewing, then holding out his hand to receive it back. "Chew it?" the boy asked, confused but willing. Kyle nodded. The boy took the bark and began to chew, his face immediately twisting in disgust at the intensely bitter taste. It was harsh, unpleasant, but he did not stop, working the bark between his teeth until it formed a pulpy mass. After a moment, Kyle took it back and pressed the pulp gently against the girl's lips, working her mouth open slightly. She stirred weakly, her mouth opening, and Kyle let a few drops of water follow from his canteen, washing the medicine down her throat. It was not much, but it was something. The willow bark would help with the fever, reduce the inflammation, ease her pain. It might be enough to give her body the chance it needed to fight. The boy watched, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle fighting against the wind, fragile and desperately clinging to life. "Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice breaking on the question, needing reassurance, needing someone to tell him everything would be all right. Kyle did not answer immediately. He could not promise what he did not know. The fever would break or it would not. The infection would heal or it would spread through her blood and kill her. He had done all he could with what he had. The rest was beyond his control, in the hands of forces greater than any man. Instead of answering, he stood and gestured toward the canyon behind them, indicating with a movement of his head that they needed to move, needed to find better shelter. The boy shook his head violently, panic rising in his eyes again, sharp and immediate. "We can't go back," he said quickly, words tumbling out. "They'll find us. They're looking for us. They're coming." Kyle's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. He turned, scanning the ridge again, with the practiced eye of a warrior, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. The boy saw the shift, saw the way Kale's entire body tensed, the way his eyes sharpened and hardened, the way he transformed from healer to warrior in the span of a heartbeat. And the boy understood. This man was not just a healer. He was someone who knew how to fight, who had fought before, who would fight again if necessary. "Who is looking for you?" Kyle's voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together, the first words he had spoken. The sound startled the boy, but he answered quickly, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush, needing to make Kale understand the danger they were in. "Men. Bad men. They came to our camp 3 days ago. We were traveling with a wagon train, heading west toward California. There were 12 families, good people, farmers and merchants and families just looking for a better life. My mama and papa, they were helping others, sharing what little we had. We didn't have anything valuable, nothing worth stealing, just clothes and tools and hope. But the men didn't care. They didn't care about any of that." The boy's voice cracked and he wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing dirt and tears across his cheeks. "They came at night, when everyone was sleeping. They had guns, rifles and pistols, and they started shooting before anyone even knew what was happening. People screamed. People ran, but there was nowhere to go. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by open land. Some people tried to fight back, but they were farmers, not soldiers. They didn't stand a chance." The boy's whole body was shaking now, reliving the horror, seeing it all again behind his eyes. "They killed everyone. Mama tried to hide us under the wagon, covered us with blankets, and told us to be quiet, to not make a sound no matter what we heard. But we heard everything. The gunshots, the screaming, people begging for their lives. Papa tried to fight. He had an old rifle, hadn't fired it in years, but he tried. He got one shot off before they shot him, multiple times. He fell right there, right in front of the wagon where we were hiding. His blood soaked into the ground. Ruth screamed when she saw him fall, and they heard her. They heard her scream. The boy was sobbing now, barely able to get the words out. Mama knew they'd heard. She pulled us out from under the wagon and told us to run. She was crying, holding our faces, telling us she loved us. She said to run and don't stop. Don't look back. Just run as fast as we could and find help. So we ran. We ran into the darkness, into the desert. Ruth kept crying, kept trying to look back, but I pulled her along. I heard Mama screaming behind us, and then I heard a gunshot, and then I didn't hear her anymore. His voice broke completely, and for a moment he couldn't continue. We ran for hours. I don't even know how long. It was dark, and we kept tripping and falling, and then Ruth fell hard, hit some rocks, and cut her arm. It was bleeding so much. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. I tore my shirt and wrapped it, but the blood kept coming. I tried to carry her, but I'm not strong enough. I'm not big enough. So I just dragged her along, and we kept going. We hid during the day yesterday, and then we kept moving at night. But I saw them. Yesterday, in the distance. They're still following us. They're still hunting us. I don't know why they won't just let us go. We didn't do anything. We're just kids. Samuel looked up at Kyle, his eyes desperate and pleading. If they find us, please protect my sister, he whispered, his voice trembling with every ounce of desperation a child could feel. Please, she's all I have left. Everyone else is gone. She's all I have. Kyle stared at the boy for a long moment, letting the weight of those words settle over him. Samuel was not asking for himself. He was asking for his sister. Even now, exhausted and terrified and traumatized, his first thought was protecting her. That kind of love, that kind of selflessness was rare. Kyle had seen grown men abandon each other when danger came. But this child, this small boy, had dragged his sister for miles, had refused to leave her, had risked everything to save her. Kyle had spent years walking alone, choosing solitude over the pain of connection, over the loss that always followed. He had buried too many people he loved. His wife, killed in a raid, his daughter taken by fever, his brothers fallen in battle. And so he had walked away from it all, into the wilderness, into the silence, choosing the company of stone and sky because they could not be taken from him, could not die and leave him hollow. But here, in this moment, with this child looking up at him with eyes full of fear and fragile hope, something inside him shifted. Something he thought had died long ago stirred back to life. He knelt again, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. His grip was firm, steady, grounding, the grip of someone making a promise. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of an unbreakable vow, the kind of promise a warrior makes once in a lifetime and carries to his grave. No one gets past me. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Tears spilled down his cheeks, but this time they were not just from fear. They were from relief, from gratitude, from the first glimmer of safety he had felt in 3 long, horrible days. Someone had finally said they would help. Someone had finally promised to stand between them and the darkness. Kyle stood, reaching down and lifting Ruth carefully into his arms. She was light, far too light, her body limp and burning with fever. He adjusted her weight, cradling her against his chest, positioning her so her injured arm was supported and protected. Then he looked down at Samuel and gave a single nod. "What is your name?" Kyle asked, his voice still rough but somehow gentler now. "Samuel," the boy said quietly, his voice hoarse from crying and dehydration. "And hers?" "Ruth. Her name is Ruth." Kyle nodded, committing the names to memory, making them real, making them matter. Come, Samuel, we move now. Stay close to me. Do not fall behind. Samuel scrambled to his feet, his legs shaking with exhaustion, muscles screaming in protest, but he did not hesitate. He followed Kyle out of the canyon, staying close, his small hand occasionally brushing against Kyle's side, anchoring himself to the only protection he had left in this world. Behind them, far in the distance but growing closer, the sound of hooves echoed faintly through the rocks, bouncing off the canyon walls, multiplying and distorting. Kyle heard them clearly. 3 horses, maybe 4, moving at a steady pace, tracking, hunting. They were not far now. Maybe an hour behind, maybe less. He did not slow his pace. He did not look back. He simply tightened his grip on Ruth and kept moving, his mind already calculating the path ahead, identifying the places they could hide, the defensive positions he could take, the ways he could fight if it came to that. And it would come to that. He knew it as surely as he knew the sun would rise tomorrow. These men had already killed an entire wagon train. They would not stop hunting 2 children who could identify them, who could tell their story. They would hunt Samuel and Ruth until they were dead. But they would have to go through Kyle first. And Kyle Stoneheart had not survived this long by being easy to kill. The canyon walls rose higher around them as they moved deeper into the earth, the passage narrowing, the light fading as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The shadows grew long and deep, swallowing them in darkness. Samuel stayed close, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, but he did not complain. He did not ask to stop. He simply kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, driven by fear and hope and the presence of this warrior who had promised to protect them. And Kyle, silent and unyielding, carried Ruth forward into the unknown, his jaw set, his eyes scanning constantly for threats, ready to stand between these children and whatever darkness followed them through the desert. He had made a promise, and Kyle Stoneheart did not break his word. The hidden shelter lay deep within the canyon, a place Kyle had discovered years ago during his wanderings. It was a natural cave carved into the cliff face, accessible only by a narrow ledge that required careful footing and intimate knowledge of the path. Most men would never find it, and those who did would likely fall to their deaths trying to reach it. But Kyle knew every handhold, every footstep, every twist of the approach. He had used this place before when winter storms swept through the territory, when he needed shelter from more than just weather. The sun had fully set by the time they reached the cave entrance. Darkness had swallowed the canyon completely, and only the pale light of the rising moon provided any illumination. Samuel stumbled behind Kyle, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, but the boy refused to stop. His eyes remained fixed on his sister, cradled in Kyle's arms, her shallow breathing the only sound besides their footsteps and the distant whisper of wind through stone. Inside the cave, Kyle laid Ruth gently on a bed of dried grass and soft animal hides he had stored there months ago. The space was surprisingly large once you moved past the narrow entrance, opening into a chamber roughly 15 feet across with a ceiling high enough for a man to stand comfortably. A natural chimney in the rock face above allowed smoke to escape, making it safe to build a fire without revealing their position. Kyle had chosen this place carefully years ago, understanding that sometimes survival required more than strength. It required invisibility. Samuel collapsed beside his sister immediately, his hand finding hers, gripping it tightly as if physical contact alone could keep her tethered to life. Kyle moved efficiently, gathering kindling from a pile he maintained in the corner, arranging stones in a circle for a fire pit. Within minutes, flames crackled to life, casting dancing shadows across the cave walls. The warmth spread slowly through the chamber, pushing back the chill that had settled into their bones. Ruth stirred slightly as the warmth reached her, a small moan escaping her lips. Her face was flushed with fever, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. Samuel leaned closer, whispering her name, but she did not wake. Her eyelids fluttered, moving rapidly beneath closed lids as if trapped in nightmares. She could not escape. Kyle knelt beside them, checking the bandage on Ruth's arm. Blood had seeped through in places, but not as much as before. The bleeding was slowing, which was good. The stitches held firm, but the fever remained high, dangerously so. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He placed his hand against her forehead again, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. The infection was fighting back against the herbs, and the battle was not yet won. He stood and moved to a leather pack hanging from a natural hook in the stone wall. From it, he withdrew strips of dried meat, a small pouch of ground corn, and a water skin he had filled from a spring deeper in the canyon system. He brought the water to Samuel first, pressing it into the boy's trembling hands. "Drink," Kyle said simply. Samuel drank greedily, water spilling down his chin, and Kyle had to pull the skin away gently to prevent him from making himself sick. "Slowly," Kyle instructed, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your belly is empty. Too much too fast will make you vomit." Samuel nodded, understanding, and took smaller sips. When he had drunk enough, Kyle dampened a cloth and carefully dripped water between Ruth's lips, tilting her head slightly to help her swallow. Most of it ran down her chin, but some made it past her lips, and that was enough for now. Kyle prepared a simple meal, mixing the ground corn with water and a pinch of salt, forming it into small cakes that he placed on flat stones near the fire to cook. The smell filled the cave, earthy and wholesome, and Samuel's stomach growled audibly. The boy flushed with embarrassment, but Kyle showed no reaction. Hunger was nothing to be ashamed of. It was simply a fact of survival. Aishin. While the corn cakes cooked, Kyle sat across the fire from Samuel, studying the boy in the flickering light. The child was thin, underfed even before this ordeal began. His clothes were worn and patched, the clothes of a family with little money, but enough pride to keep things clean and mended. His hands were calloused in places unusual for a child his age, suggesting he had worked hard, helped his parents with difficult tasks. There was strength in this boy, hidden beneath the fear and exhaustion. Strength that had carried him and his sister across miles of unforgiving desert. "Tell me about the men who are following you," Kyle said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, steady, inviting truth without demanding it. Samuel looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight, making them seem older than they should be. He swallowed hard, his throat working against the memory. "There were 5 of them," Samuel began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 6. It was dark, and there was so much confusion. But I remember their leader. He was tall, taller than Papa, with a beard that came down to his chest. It was black but with grey streaks. He wore a hat with a silver band around it, and he had 2 pistols on his belt, fancy ones with white handles. He smiled when he shot people, like it made him happy." Samuel's voice cracked, and he paused, struggling to continue. He was giving orders to the others, telling them which wagons to search, who to shoot. He was in charge, and the others did whatever he said. One of the other men, he was shorter, stocky, with a scar across his nose. He had a rifle with some kind of marking on the stock. Looked like it might have been military issue. Another one was younger, maybe not much older than 20, with red hair and freckles. He looked nervous, like maybe he did not want to be there, but he did what he was told anyway. Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. They were not just killing people for supplies. They enjoyed it. They laughed. They made jokes while people begged for their lives. When Mama was begging them to spare us, the leader just laughed and said children were worth more than adults in some places, whatever that meant. That's when Mama told us to run. She knew what he meant, even if I did not understand then. Samuel's whole body shook with the memory, and Kyle felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Human trafficking, slavers, the worst kind of men. The kind who saw children not as human beings, but as commodities to be bought and sold. Kyle had heard stories of such men operating along the frontier, raiding settlements and wagon trains, taking children to sell in territories where law was scarce and morality scarcer still. He had never encountered them directly before, but he had seen the aftermath once, years ago. An abandoned camp with chains still staked to the ground. The memory made his jaw clench. "How long have they been following you?" Kyle asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the anger building inside him. "Since the attack," Samuel said. "At first I thought maybe we had gotten away. We ran so far that night. But the next morning, when I climbed a rock to look back, I saw them. They were at the wagon train, going through everything, taking what they wanted. And then I saw two of them get on horses and start riding in the direction we had gone. They were tracking us. I knew they were tracking us." Fear crept back into Samuel's voice. "We hid that whole day under some brush near a dried-up stream bed. Ruth was already getting sick by then. The cut was not bleeding as much, but it looked bad, all red and swollen. She was hot to the touch. I tried to keep her quiet, but she kept crying, saying it hurt. I was so scared they would hear her. We stayed there until dark, and then we started moving again. But Ruth could barely walk by then. I had to drag her most of the way. And this morning, when I looked back again from higher ground, I saw them again. They were closer, much closer. That's when I knew we could not outrun them anymore." Samuel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "That's when I started praying for a miracle. And then we found you." Kyle absorbed this information, his mind working through the tactical situation. Two men tracking, possibly more back at the wagon train site. They would be experienced hunters, comfortable in this terrain, motivated by profit. They would not give up easily. And they would not expect resistance. They would expect to find two exhausted, defenseless children. Instead, they would find Kale Stoneheart. The corn cakes were ready, and Kale used a flat piece of wood to remove them from the hot stones. He handed two to Samuel, who took them gratefully, burning his fingers slightly in his eagerness. Kyle broke one of his own cakes into small pieces and tried again to feed Ruth, placing tiny fragments on her tongue and following them with drops of water. She swallowed reflexively, still unconscious, but responding to the basic instinct to consume. Samuel ate quickly, barely chewing, his body desperate for sustenance. Kyle watched him, then handed over another cake without comment. The boy needed strength, needed calories to replace what he had burned over 3 days of running and terror. When Samuel finally slowed, his belly full for the first time in days, Kyle saw tears running down the boy's cheeks again. "I thought we were going to die," Samuel whispered. "I thought Ruth was going to die, and then I was going to die, and no one would ever know what happened to us. No one would know what those men did. They would just disappear, and it would be like our whole wagon train never existed. Like Mom and Papa never existed." The weight of survivor's guilt pressed down on the child's shoulders, visible in the way he hunched over, in the way his hands trembled. Kyle moved around the fire and sat beside Samuel. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he pulled a small carving from his vest pocket, a piece of smooth wood shaped like a wolf, intricate details carved into its surface. He had made it years ago, during a long winter when the snow had trapped him in this very cave for weeks. He turned it over in his hands, letting Samuel see it. "My daughter made me promise to carve her a wolf," Kale said, his voice rough with old pain. "She loved wolves. Used to say they were misunderstood, that people feared them, but they were just trying to survive like everyone else. I started this carving the winter before she died. Never finished it while she was alive. Afterward, I could not bring myself to throw it away, so I finished it. I carry it to remember her, to remember that love does not end just because someone is gone." He placed the carving in Samuel's hands. Samuel looked down at it, his fingers tracing the carved details. "What was her name?" he asked quietly. "Ayasha. It means little one in my language," Kyle said. "She was 6 when the fever took her. My wife died 2 days later from the same sickness. I could not save them, I knew medicine, knew herbs, knew everything my grandmother had taught me, but I could not save them. The words came slowly, painfully, like drawing poison from a wound. Samuel looked up at Kyle, seeing the man fully for the first time, not just as a rescuer or a warrior, but as someone who understood loss, who carried his own grief. "I'm sorry," Samuel whispered. Kyle nodded slowly. "I tell you this so you understand something important, Samuel. Your parents loved you and Ruth enough to die protecting you. That love does not disappear because they are gone. It lives in you. It lives in every choice you make to protect your sister, in every step you took to keep her alive. They are not gone as long as you remember them, as long as you carry their love forward." Cale's hand rested on Samuel's shoulder, firm and grounding. "You are not alone anymore. I make you this promise now. I will protect you and Ruth. I will stand between you and those men. And I will make sure their story is told. Make sure people know what happened to your wagon train. Your parents will be remembered. I swear this to you." The vow hung in the air between them, sacred and unbreakable. Samuel looked into Cale's eyes and saw only truth there, only certainty. The boy's shoulders shook, and then he collapsed against Kyle, sobbing into the warrior's chest, releasing days of held terror and grief. Kyle held him, one hand on the boy's back, letting him cry. He had forgotten what this felt like, this connection, this responsibility to another human being. He had chosen isolation to avoid this exact pain, to never again risk caring for someone he might lose. But here he was, holding a traumatized child in a cave, while armed men hunted them through the darkness. And despite everything, despite all his years of careful distance, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt purpose. After a while, Samuel's sobs quieted. The boy pulled back, wiping his face, embarrassed by his tears. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "Never apologize for grief," Kyle said firmly. "Tears are not weakness. They are proof you loved someone enough to hurt when they are gone. That is strength, not weakness." Samuel nodded, seeming to grow a little taller with those words. Kyle stood and moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the darkness. The moon had risen higher, casting silver light across the canyon floor far below. Nothing moved that he could see, but that meant little. Experienced trackers could move unseen even in moonlight. He listened carefully, filtering out the natural sounds of the desert night, the distant call of an owl, the skitter of small creatures among the rocks, the whisper of wind. Nothing unusual. Not yet. He returned to the fire and began preparing for what would come. From his pack, he withdrew extra ammunition for his rifle, checking each round carefully. He laid out his knife, testing its edge against his thumb, satisfied with its sharpness. He had another knife, smaller, hidden in his boot. 2 pistols were wrapped in oilcloth, stored in the pack for emergencies. He loaded both, methodically checking the mechanisms. Samuel watched these preparations with wide eyes. "Are they coming tonight?" he asked, fear creeping back into his voice. "Possibly," Cale said honestly. "But if they are smart, they will wait until dawn. Tracking in darkness is difficult even for skilled hunters. They will want light to see the trail clearly, to avoid mistakes. But I do not assume enemies are smart. I prepare for them to be clever." He continued his work, his movements calm and practiced. "What will happen if they find us?" Samuel asked. Cale paused, considering how much truth to give a child. He decided on honesty. "If they find us, I will give them one chance to leave. If they do not take it, I will stop them, permanently." The coldness in his voice left no doubt about what that meant. Samuel swallowed hard but nodded. He understood. Some situations left no room for mercy. "Can you teach me?" Samuel asked suddenly. "Teach you what?" "To fight. To protect Ruth. In case something happens to you, I need to know how to keep her safe." The boy's voice was desperate, pleading. Kyle studied him for a long moment. 7 years old, maybe 8, small for his age, exhausted and traumatized. But there was steel in him, determination that age had not put there. Tragedy had forged it. "I can teach you some things," Kyle said finally. "But not tonight. Tonight you rest. You are no good to Ruth if you collapse from exhaustion. Tomorrow, if we are still safe, I will begin to show you." But understand this, Samuel. Fighting is not just about weapons or strength. It is about knowing when to fight and when to run. It is about protecting what matters, not proving how brave you are. Do you understand? Samuel nodded seriously, absorbing every word. Kyle added more wood to the fire, building it up to last through the night. The warmth was important, especially for Ruth. Her body needed heat to fight the infection, needed to stay warm to have any chance of recovery. He checked her bandage again, relieved to see no fresh bleeding. Her fever remained high, but it had not worsened, which was something. He administered more willow bark, more water, his movements gentle and practiced. "Sleep now," Kyle told Samuel, pointing to a pile of hides near the fire. "I will keep watch. Nothing will reach you without going through me first." Samuel hesitated, looking between Ruth and the sleeping area. "Can I stay next to her?" he asked quietly. Kyle nodded, understanding. Samuel needed the physical closeness, needed to know his sister was still breathing, still alive. The boy curled up next to Ruth, one hand holding hers. His body pressed close to share warmth. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed Samuel, and he fell into deep sleep, the kind of sleep that only comes after days without rest. His breathing evened out, deep and slow. Gale sat near the cave entrance, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond. The fire crackled behind him, its light not reaching far enough to expose their position. The natural chimney drew the smoke upward and dispersed it, making the cave invisible from below. Hours passed. The moon tracked across the sky. Cale remained motionless. His senses extended into the night, reading every sound, every shift in the wind. This was a skill he had honed over decades, the ability to become part of the landscape, to sense danger before it arrived. It had kept him alive through countless encounters, through wars and raids and desperate winters. Around midnight, something changed. The normal sounds of the desert night altered subtly. The insects stopped chirping in one section of the canyon. A rock shifted, the sound faint but distinct. Gale's hand tightened on his rifle. Someone was moving below, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. He listened carefully, counting the disturbances. 2 men, possibly 3, moving slowly up the canyon, searching. They were not coming directly to the cave. They did not know where it was. They were sweeping the area, checking every shadow, every possible hiding place. Methodical, professional, dangerous. Kyle calculated distances and angles. They were still a quarter mile away, maybe more. They would not reach this area before dawn at their current pace. Good. That gave him time to prepare. He moved silently back to the children, checking on them without waking them. Ruth's breathing remained shallow but steady. Samuel slept deeply, his small face finally peaceful. Cale allowed himself a moment of something he had not felt in years, a protective instinct that went beyond mere survival. These children had lost everything, but they did not have to lose their lives. Not while he still drew breath. He returned to his position, watching, waiting. The men below continued their search, their movements growing more frustrated as they found nothing. Eventually they stopped, and Kyle heard the faint murmur of voices, too distant to make out words, but close enough to confirm they were conferring, debating their next move. After several minutes, they retreated back down the canyon, likely returning to their camp to wait for better light. Kyle allowed himself to relax slightly, though he did not lower his guard. They would return at dawn, and when they did, they would be more determined, more aggressive. They had invested too much time in this hunt to give up easily. The confrontation was coming, inevitable as sunrise. Kyle accepted this without fear or hesitation. He had faced death many times before. This would be no different, except it was different. This time, he was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for 2 children who had no one else, who had been marked for death or worse by men who saw them as objects rather than human beings. This time, the fight mattered in a way his previous battles had not. This time, he was protecting something precious, something innocent, something that reminded him why life was worth living even when grief made it seem otherwise. As the first hint of gray appeared on the eastern horizon, Kyle made his decision. He would not wait for them to find the cave. He would not let them get close to Samuel and Ruth. He would go to them, on his terms, on ground of his choosing. He would end this before it began, and he would make sure these men never hunted children again. The warrior checked his weapons one final time, his face set in grim determination. The sun would rise soon, and with it would come blood and violence. But Cale Stoneheart was ready. He had made a promise and he would keep it, no matter the cost. Dawn broke cold and sharp across the New Mexico Badlands, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The temperature had dropped during the night, and frost clung to the canyon walls in delicate patterns that would vanish with the first touch of sunlight. Cale had not slept. He stood at the cave entrance, watching the world transform from darkness to light, his mind calculating, planning, preparing for what must come. Behind him, Samuel stirred, waking with a small gasp as memory crashed back into consciousness. The boy sat up quickly, immediately reaching for Ruth, panic flashing across his face until he felt her chest rising and falling beneath his hand. She was still alive, still breathing, still fighting. Samuel's shoulders sagged with relief, and he looked toward Cale, who stood silhouetted against the growing light. "Did they come?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse from sleep and fear. Kyle turned slightly, his profile sharp against the dawn. "They searched the lower canyon during the night. They did not find us, but they will return with the light. They are patient and they are determined." His voice carried no fear, only stating facts as immutable as the stone surrounding them. Samuel stood on shaky legs and moved to join Cale at the entrance, looking down at the canyon floor far below. From this vantage point, he could see for miles in every direction. The land stretched out in shades of red and tan and purple, beautiful and merciless. "What are we going to do?" the boy asked, trying to sound brave, but not quite succeeding. Kyle was silent for a moment, then he knelt beside Samuel, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "I'm going to leave the cave and draw them away from here. You will stay with Ruth. You will keep her warm, give her water when she wakes, and you will not leave this cave no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" His dark eyes bored into Samuel's, demanding comprehension and obedience. "You're going to fight them alone." Samuel's voice rose with alarm. "You said there were at least 2 of them, maybe more. How can you fight them all by yourself?" The boy's hands clenched into fists, his thin frame trembling not with fear, but with the desperate need to help, to not be helpless again. Cale placed a firm hand on Samuel's shoulder. "I have fought greater numbers before. I know this land better than they do. I know how to make them come to me where I am strongest. This is what I do, Samuel. This is what I've always done. But I need you to be strong here, to protect your sister while I protect both of you out there. Can you do that?" Gael's voice was steady, confident, giving Samuel something solid to hold on to. "Misha." Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to beg Cale not to go, not to leave them. But he looked back at Ruth, so small and fragile on the pile of hides, and he understood. Someone had to stay with her. Someone had to be here if she woke up frightened and alone. He turned back to Kyle and nodded, swallowing his fear. "I can do that. I'll take care of her. I promise." His voice was small but determined. Kyle reached into his vest and pulled out the small knife he kept as a backup weapon. It was not large, but it was sharp and well-balanced. He held it out to Samuel, handle first. "If anyone other than me comes through that entrance, you hide with Ruth in the back of the cave. If they find you anyway, you use this. You aim for the throat or the belly. You do not hesitate. Do you understand?" The weight of what he was asking settled over the boy like a heavy cloak. Samuel took the knife with trembling hands, feeling its weight, its purpose. He had never held a weapon before, never imagined he would need to, but the world had changed 3 days ago. Childhood had ended in gunfire and screaming. He looked up at Cale and nodded. "I understand. I won't let them hurt Ruth, I swear it." There was something ancient in his voice, something that transcended his years. Kyle studied the boy for a long moment, seeing echoes of warriors past, seeing the kind of strength that came not from muscle, but from love and desperation. He nodded once, approving. Then he stood and gathered his weapons. The rifle went across his back. 2 pistols were tucked into his belt. His primary knife hung at his hip. He checked everything twice, methodically. The ritual of a man who had survived countless fights through preparation and discipline. Before leaving, Kyle moved to Ruth's side and checked her one final time. The fever had broken slightly during the night. Her forehead was still warm but no longer burning. The infection was losing its grip, slowly, grudgingly, but losing nonetheless. She would live probably if nothing else went wrong, if she was given time to heal. If Kyle succeeded in what he was about to do, he looked at Samuel one last time. No matter what you hear, you stay here. Even if you hear gunfire, even if you hear nothing for hours, you wait until I return or until a full day has passed. If I do not return by tomorrow's dawn, you take Ruth and head north. Follow the canyon until you reach the river. Follow the river west until you find a settlement. Tell them what happened. Make them listen. Make them remember. His instructions were clear, precise, a backup plan in case everything went wrong. You'll come back, Samuel said. And it was not a question but a statement of faith, of desperate need. Kyle did not promise what he could not guarantee. Instead, he placed his hand briefly on Samuel's head, a gesture of blessing or farewell, then turned and disappeared through the cave entrance, moving down the narrow ledge with the sure-footed grace of a mountain cat. Samuel watched until Kyle vanished from sight, swallowed by the canyon's shadows and angles. Then he was alone with his unconscious sister and a knife that felt too heavy in his hand. He moved back to Ruth's side and sat down, pulling her closer, sharing his warmth. "He'll come back," Samuel whispered to her unhearing ears. "He promised to protect us. He'll come back." He repeated it like a prayer, like speaking the words could make them true. Far below, Kyle moved through the canyon with purpose and speed. He knew exactly where he was going, had chosen the location during the night while he watched and listened. There was a place 2 miles south where the canyon narrowed to barely 10 feet across, with high walls on either side and limited sight lines. A natural choke point, a killing ground. That was where he would make his stand. He reached the location as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, flooding the canyon with harsh morning light. Kyle positioned himself behind a large boulder that provided cover, while allowing him a clear view of the approach from both directions. He checked his rifle one more time, worked the action to ensure it was smooth, then settled in to wait. Patience was a warrior's greatest weapon, and Kyle had learned patience in the hardest school imaginable. He did not have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, he heard them coming. 2 horses moving at a walk, their riders careful and alert. Kyle watched through a gap in the rocks as they came into view. The first man matched Samuel's description perfectly, tall and bearded, with a silver-banded hat and 2 fancy pistols. The leader. Behind him rode a shorter, stockier man with a prominent scar across his nose, carrying a military-issue rifle. Both men scanned the canyon walls as they rode, looking for tracks, for signs, for any indication of where 2 children might hide. Kyle waited until they were fully committed to the narrow section, with rock walls rising sheer on either side and no room to maneuver their horses. Then he stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle raised but not yet aimed, giving them the chance he had promised himself he would give. One chance. "That's far enough," Kyle called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. Both men jerked in their saddles, hands flying to their weapons. The horses danced nervously, sensing tension. The bearded leader's eyes locked onto Kyle, assessing, calculating. "Well now," he said slowly, his voice smooth and educated, at odds with his rough appearance. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here. You startled us, friend." His hand remained near his pistol. "I am not your friend," Kyle said flatly. "And you are trespassing. Turn around and leave. Do not come back to this canyon, ever." His stance was relaxed but ready, the rifle held casually, but positioned to swing up and fire in a fraction of a second. The bearded man smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Now that's not very neighborly. We're just looking for something we lost. 2 young ones, boy and a girl. You wouldn't happen to have seen them, would you? We're family, you see. The children ran off after a misunderstanding. We're worried sick about them." The lie was smooth, practiced, delivered with just the right amount of concern. Kyle's expression did not change. "There are no children here. Only death if you do not leave." The temperature seemed to drop despite the rising sun. The scarred man shifted in his saddle, his rifle moving slightly. Cale's eyes flicked to him, marking the movement, calculating the threat. The bearded man's smile faded, replaced by something colder, harder. "I don't think you understand the situation, Indian. Those children are valuable property. We've invested considerable time and effort into acquiring them. We're not leaving without them. Now you can tell us where they are and ride away with your life, or you can be difficult, and we'll kill you and find them anyway. Your choice." His hand moved closer to his pistol, confidence radiating from him. "You killed their parents," Kyle said, his voice flat and cold as winter stone. "You killed an entire wagon train. Men, women, children. You hunt these two because they can testify against you. You plan to sell them to slavers. I know what you are. I know what you do. And I am giving you one final chance. Leave now or die here." The words hung in the air like a sentence passed by an ancient judge. The bearded man's face twisted with rage at being lectured by someone he clearly considered beneath him. "Kill this savage," he snarled to his companion, his hand diving for his pistol. But Kyle was already moving. The rifle came up smooth and fast, the shot echoing through the canyon like thunder. The scarred man jerked backward in his saddle, a red flower blooming on his chest. He toppled sideways, hitting the ground with a heavy thud, his rifle clattering on stone. The bearded man's pistol cleared leather, but Kyle was already diving behind the boulder, the shot missing him by inches and sparking off rock. The man's horse reared, panicked by the gunfire, nearly throwing its rider. The bearded man fought to control the animal while trying to aim for another shot, but Kyle had vanished into the rocks like smoke. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "You're dead," the bearded man shouted, firing twice more into the rocks where Kyle had been, bullets whining off stone. "You hear me? You're dead!" He dismounted quickly, using his horse as cover, both pistols now drawn. His eyes scanned the canyon walls, looking for movement, for any sign of his enemy. Nothing, only echoes and gun smoke. Kale had moved the moment he hit cover, circling through a crack in the rocks he had scouted earlier. A passage so narrow most men would not have seen it, would not have believed a human could fit through. But Kale was lean and knew how to make himself smaller, how to use terrain that others dismissed as impassable. He emerged 30 feet behind the bearded man, silent as a ghost. The bearded man heard something, some instinct warning him, and spun, firing both pistols. But Kale had already dropped flat, the bullets passing overhead. Kale's rifle barked once, and the bearded man screamed, his right pistol flying from his hand as the bullet shattered his wrist. He stumbled backward, clutching his ruined hand, blood pouring between his fingers. His remaining pistol came up, but his hand was shaking, pain and shock destroying his aim. Kyle stood slowly, rifle trained on the man's chest. "Drop it," he commanded. The bearded man's face contorted with pain and rage. "Go to hell," he spat, trying to steady his aim. Kyle fired. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol fell from his grasp. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, blood soaking his fancy coat. Both horses had bolted during the firefight, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Kyle approached carefully, rifle never wavering. He kicked both pistols away, far out of reach. The bearded man looked up at him, hatred burning in his eyes despite his wounds. "You think you've won?" he gasped. "There are 3 more of us back at camp. They'll come looking. They'll find those brats and make them scream before they sell them. You've accomplished nothing." Blood flecked his lips as he spoke. "Where is your camp?" Kale asked, his voice emotionless. The bearded man laughed, a wet, painful sound. "Like I'd tell you, you're one man. You can't fight all of us. We'll hunt you down. We'll make you watch while we—" He never finished the sentence. Kyle's rifle butt struck him across the temple, and he collapsed unconscious into the dust. Kyle stood over the fallen men for a moment, his expression unreadable. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph. This was simply what needed to be done, like clearing brush or diverting a stream. Necessary work? Survival? He moved to the scarred man first, checking for a pulse. Dead. The shot had taken him through the heart. Quick and clean. The bearded man still breathed, though his injuries were severe. He would live if he received medical attention soon. But there was no medical attention out here. Kyle dragged both bodies to a shallow depression in the canyon floor and covered them with rocks and brush. It was not a proper burial, but it was more than they deserved. He gathered their weapons, ammunition, and supplies. The rifles were good quality, better than what most frontier criminals carried. Military issue, probably stolen. The pistols were custom-made, expensive, the toys of a man who valued appearance over function. Kyle took everything useful and cached it in the rocks for later retrieval. Then he began tracking backward, following the trail the two men had left, looking for signs that would lead him to their camp. He found it 2 miles south, tucked into a box canyon with good water and grass for horses. 3 more men, just as the bearded one had said. They were eating breakfast around a small fire, relaxed and confident, not expecting trouble. Their horses were picketed nearby, saddles and gear stacked carelessly. Kyle studied them from concealment for 20 minutes, learning their patterns, their habits. One man was older, grizzled, with the lean hardness of a long-time outlaw. Another was young, barely 20, with red hair and freckles, nervous energy in every movement. The third was massive, well over 6 feet and thick with muscle, moving with the dangerous grace of a man comfortable with violence. All 3 were armed, but their weapons were not immediately at hand. They felt safe here, protected by distance and isolation. They were wrong. Kyle waited until the big man stood and walked away from the fire toward the horses, separating himself from the group. Then Kyle moved. He closed the distance in seconds, coming up behind the big man with his knife already in hand. The blade went between the ribs, angled up toward the heart, driven with precision born of experience. The big man gasped, tried to turn, but Kyle held him steady, lowering him quietly to the ground as life fled his eyes. The other 2 men noticed nothing, still sitting by the fire, talking about how much money they would make when they found the children. Gale approached from a different angle, using the terrain and morning shadows to remain invisible. He was within 20 feet before the older man sensed something wrong and reached for his rifle. Too slow. Kyle's shot took him in the chest, and he fell backward into the fire, scattering coals and sending up a shower of sparks. The red-haired young man screamed and scrambled for his gun, panic destroying any skill he might have possessed. Kale's second shot caught him in the leg, dropping him. The young man writhed on the ground, clutching his thigh, blood pumping between his fingers. Kale approached slowly, rifle trained on him. The young man looked up, tears streaming down his face, no longer a dangerous criminal, but just a terrified boy, not much older than Samuel. "Please," the young man begged. "Please don't kill me. I didn't want to do it. They made me. I didn't have a choice." His voice broke with terror and pain. Kyle stared down at him, his face showing nothing. "You had a choice," Kyle said quietly. "You chose wrong. You chose to hunt children. You chose to kill families. Actions have consequences." The young man sobbed, shaking his head desperately. "I'll leave. I'll go away and never come back. I swear it, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kyle considered him for a long moment, weighing judgment and mercy. Then he lowered the rifle slightly. "Can you ride?" he asked. The young man nodded frantically. Yes, I can ride, please." Kyle gestured toward the horses with his rifle barrel. "Take a horse. Take water and supplies. Ride east until you reach a settlement. When you get there, you tell the law what happened here. You tell them about the wagon train, about the murders, about the children you hunted. You tell them everything. If I ever see you again, if I ever hear you've hurt anyone again, I will find you and finish what I started here. Do you understand?" His voice carried absolute conviction. The young man nodded violently, still crying. "I understand. I'll tell them. I promise. Thank you." "Thank you?" He dragged himself to his feet, limping badly, and stumbled toward the horses. Kyle watched as the young man saddled a horse with shaking hands, loaded supplies with desperate haste, and rode away without looking back, disappearing into the morning haze. Kyle turned back to the camp. The older man was definitely dead, his body sprawled among the scattered coals. The big man lay where Kyle had left him. Kyle dragged both bodies away from the camp and covered them as he had the others. Then he put out the fire, gathered the remaining horses and supplies, and began the long walk back to the cave. The sun was high in the sky by the time Kyle returned to the narrow ledge leading to the cave entrance. He called out before approaching, not wanting to startle Samuel into doing something foolish with the knife. "Samuel, it is Kyle. I am coming up." He heard movement inside, then Samuel appeared at the entrance, his face a mixture of relief and fear. "You're back," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "You're alive." Kyle climbed the last few feet to the ledge and stepped into the cave. Samuel launched himself at Kyle, wrapping his arms around the warrior's waist, holding on with desperate strength. Kyle stood still for a moment, surprised by the embrace, then slowly placed a hand on the boy's head, accepting the contact, accepting what it meant. "They will not hunt you anymore," Kyle said simply. "It is finished." Samuel looked up at him, tears streaming down his face, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the release of fear held too long. Behind them, Ruth stirred on the pile of hides, and for the first time since Kyle had found them, her eyes opened fully, clear and aware. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice weak but present. Samuel released Kyle and rushed to his sister's side, taking her hand. "I'm here, Ruth, I'm right here. We're safe now. This man, his name is Kyle, he saved us. He kept his promise." Ruth's eyes found Kyle, standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright sky beyond. And she smiled, a small fragile thing, but genuine. Kyle looked at the two children, alive and safe, and felt something shift in his chest. Some wall he had built years ago beginning to crack. He had completed his mission. The threat was eliminated. But looking at Samuel's hopeful face and Ruth's grateful smile, he realized his responsibility did not end here. These children had no one now. No family, no home, no future except what someone chose to give them. And Kyle Stoneheart, who had walked alone for so long, who had chosen isolation over connection, began to consider what it might mean to choose differently. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the canyon. Ruth's fever had broken completely on the second day, and though she remained weak, her eyes had regained their clarity and her appetite had slowly returned. The infection that had threatened to claim her life was retreating, pushed back by Kyle's medicines and her own young body's resilience. She could sit up now without becoming dizzy, could speak in full sentences without her voice fading to whispers. Samuel had barely left her side during her recovery, feeding her small portions of broth that Kyle prepared from dried meat and herbs, telling her stories to keep her spirits up, holding her hand through the moments when pain or fear threatened to overwhelm her. Kyle watched their bond with something approaching wonder, remembering how his own daughter had loved her mother with that same fierce devotion. The memory no longer cut quite as deeply as it once had. The cave had become a temporary home, transformed from a simple shelter into something that felt almost permanent. Kyle had brought up supplies from the Slavers' camp, including blankets, cooking equipment, and enough provisions to last several weeks if necessary. He had also retrieved the horses, keeping them picketed in a hidden box canyon nearby, where grass and water were plentiful. The animals would be valuable when it came time to move on, though none of them had yet discussed where they would go or what would happen next. On the morning of the 4th day, Ruth sat wrapped in blankets near the fire, her bandaged arm resting in her lap, watching Kyle prepare breakfast. Samuel had ventured outside with Kyle's permission to explore the immediate area around the cave entrance, under strict instructions not to go far and to return immediately if he saw or heard anything unusual. It was the first time Ruth had been alone with Kyle since she had regained consciousness, and she studied him with open curiosity. "Samuel says you're Comanche," Ruth said quietly, her voice still carrying the rasp of recent illness but growing stronger each day. Kyle glanced at her, then returned his attention to the corn cakes cooking on hot stones. "I am," he confirmed, his tone neutral, waiting to see where her curiosity would lead. Samuel says the men who killed our parents were afraid of you. He said you moved like a ghost and fought like thunder. Ruth's eyes were wide, but not with fear, with something closer to awe. Are all Comanche warriors like you? She asked the question with the innocent directness of a child who had not yet learned that some questions made adults uncomfortable. Kyle considered his answer carefully. Comanche warriors are taught from childhood to read the land, to move silently, to strike quickly and without mercy when defending what matters. But each warrior is different, shaped by their experiences, their losses, their choices. I am not special. I simply survived when many others did not. His voice carried the weight of old grief, old battles, old friends who existed now only in memory. Ruth was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, "Why do you live alone out here? Don't you have a family?" The question was asked with childish innocence, not understanding how deeply it cut. Gail's hands stilled for a moment over the cooking stones, then resumed their work. "I had a family once," Gail said slowly, each word chosen with care. "A wife and a daughter. They died of fever many winters ago. After they were gone, I could not stay in the places we had been together. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. So I came here, to the empty places where there were no memories to haunt me." He transferred the corn cakes to a wooden plate and brought them to Ruth, sitting cross-legged beside her. Ruth accepted the food with a small thank you, then looked at Kale with eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "Does it help? Being alone, I mean. Does it make the hurt go away?" Her question was not idle curiosity, but genuine need to understand, the question of a child who had just lost everything and was trying to comprehend how people survived such loss. Kyle met her gaze steadily. "No," he said honestly, "the hurt does not go away. It becomes part of you, like a scar that never fully heals. Being alone does not make it better. It simply makes it different. Quieter, perhaps, but also lonelier. I thought isolation would protect me from more pain. I was wrong. It only protected me from more joy." The admission surprised him even as he spoke it, recognizing a truth he had not fully acknowledged until this moment. Ruth reached out with her good hand and placed it on Kyle's arm. A small gesture of comfort from a child to an adult, reversing the expected order of things. "I'm glad you found us," she said softly. "I'm glad you weren't alone anymore when we needed you." Her words carried a wisdom beyond her years, the kind of insight that sometimes comes to those who have stared death in the face and survived. Before Kale could respond, Samuel scrambled back into the cave, his face flushed with excitement rather than fear. "Kyle, come look. There's a whole family of rabbits living in the rocks just below the ledge. I counted at least 6 of them. Do you think we could catch some? Fresh meat would be good for Ruth, right?" The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, a sign that he was beginning to heal from his trauma, beginning to find moments of normalcy and childhood wonder again. Kyle stood, grateful for the interruption. "Show me," he said, and followed Samuel out onto the ledge. Ruth remained by the fire, finishing her breakfast, a small smile playing at her lips as she listened to Samuel's animated chatter fading into the morning air. For the first time since the attack, she felt something other than fear and pain. She felt safe. She felt like maybe somehow things might be all right. Kyle spent the afternoon teaching Samuel how to set snares, showing him the proper way to identify rabbit runs, how to position the loops of braided cord to catch an animal without causing unnecessary suffering, how to check the snares regularly so nothing was left to struggle in pain. Samuel absorbed every lesson with intense focus, asking questions, practicing the knots over and over until his small fingers could tie them without thinking, "Why are you teaching me all this?" Samuel asked as they checked the 3rd snare they had set. "We have supplies from the bad men's camp. We don't need to hunt right now." Kyle adjusted a snare that Samuel had placed slightly off the ideal position, showing him the correct angle without criticism. "You need to hunt, because someday I might not be here to provide for you," Kyle said bluntly. You need to know how to feed yourself and your sister, how to survive without depending on others. Skills are the most valuable thing a man can possess. They cannot be stolen, cannot be lost, and they serve you for your entire life. He stood, surveying their work with approval. Samuel's face fell at Cale's words about not being there someday. "Are you going to leave us?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady but failing. The fear of abandonment was still too fresh, too raw. Cale looked at the boy for a long moment, seeing the vulnerability beneath the brave facade. "I do not know what the future holds," Cale said honestly. "But I will not abandon you without ensuring you can survive. That is my promise. Whatever happens, I will make certain you and Ruth are safe and cared for." It was not the reassurance Samuel wanted to hear. Not the promise that Cale would stay forever, but it was the truth. And truth was what the boy needed, even if it was not what he wanted. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and rose, Kyle built up the fire and gathered both children close. He'd been considering this conversation for 2 days, weighing options, thinking through possibilities. It was time to discuss the future, time to give them some say in what came next. "We cannot stay in this cave forever," Kyle began, his voice serious but gentle. "Ruth is healing well, but she needs more than I can provide here. She needs proper food, rest, and time to recover fully. We also need to report what happened to your wagon train. The families who died deserve to be remembered. Their deaths must be recorded so their relatives can be notified." Both children listened with complete attention. "There is a settlement 3 days' ride northwest of here called Socorro. It has a sheriff, a doctor, and good people who follow the law. We can go there, report what happened, ensure the authorities know about the slavers and what they did. After that, decisions will need to be made about your future." Kyle paused, letting them absorb this information. "What kind of decisions?" Ruth asked quietly, her hand instinctively reaching for Samuel's. Cale's expression softened slightly. "Decisions about where you will live, who will care for you. The authorities will try to find relatives, aunts or uncles or grandparents who might take you in. If no relatives can be found, they will place you with a family in need of children, people who can provide a proper home." "We don't have any relatives," Samuel said quickly, his voice rising with panic. "Mama and Papa came from back east, and all their family is dead, or they wouldn't have come west. And we're not going to live with strangers. We're staying together, and we're staying with you." His declaration was fierce, final, allowing no argument. Ruth nodded emphatically in agreement with her brother. "You saved us. You kept us alive. You're our family now." Her certainty was absolute. The simple logic of a child who saw the world in clear terms without the complications adults imposed. Kyle felt something twist in his chest, a mixture of warmth and pain. "I'm a Comanche warrior who lives alone in the wilderness," he said carefully. "I have no home to offer you, no settlement, no community. The life I lead is hard and isolated. You deserve more than that. You deserve a real family, a real home, schooling and safety and all the things children should have." He was trying to be responsible, trying to do what was best for them even if it hurt. "We don't care about that," Samuel insisted. "We want to stay with you. You can teach us to survive like you do. We'll learn everything. We'll help you. We won't be a burden, please." His voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through. Ruth was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks. Cale looked at their faces, at the fear of abandonment written so clearly in their eyes, and felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. He had told himself he was helping them temporarily, that he would deliver them to proper authorities and then return to his solitary life. But looking at them now, he knew that was a lie he had been telling himself. These children had already become his responsibility, not just physically, but emotionally. He cared what happened to them. He wanted them to be safe and happy. He wanted to be the one to ensure it. "Let me think about this," Kyle said finally. "We will still go to Socorro. We must report what happened and ensure justice is served. But I will not make any decisions about your future without your input. You will have a say in what happens next. This I promise you." It was not the commitment the children wanted, but it was movement in the right direction, and they accepted it with tentative relief. The next morning, they began preparations for the journey to Socorro. Kyle selected the 3 best horses from the animals he had taken from the Slavers' camp, checking their hooves, their teeth, their overall condition. He divided supplies into packs that could be distributed across all 3 horses, ensuring no single animal was overburdened. He fashioned a comfortable seat for Ruth on the gentlest mare, padding it with blankets so the ride would not jar her healing arm. Samuel helped with everything, learning by watching and doing, absorbing knowledge like a desert plant, absorbing rare rain. Kyle taught him how to properly saddle a horse, how to check the cinch to ensure it was tight enough to be secure, but not so tight as to cause discomfort, how to distribute weight in saddlebags for proper balance. The boy's hands were small and sometimes clumsy, but his determination was absolute. On the afternoon before their departure, Kyle took Samuel aside for a private conversation while Ruth rested in the cave. They sat on the ledge overlooking the canyon, the vast expanse of New Mexico territory spreading before them like an ancient tapestry woven in stone and sky. "Tomorrow we begin a new chapter," Kyle said, his eyes on the distant horizon. "You have survived the worst thing that could happen to a child. You watched your parents die. You kept your sister alive through impossible circumstances. You have earned the right to be heard, to have your wishes considered." He turned to look at Samuel directly. "But I need you to understand something important. The life I live is not easy. It is not comfortable. There are no guarantees of safety, no certainty of tomorrow. If you and Ruth choose to stay with me, you will learn to hunt, to track, to fight when necessary. You will learn the ways of the land and the skills needed to survive. But you will also learn to read and write, to understand numbers and history. I may live in the wilderness, but I will not raise children in ignorance. Do you understand what I am saying?" His tone was serious, laying out expectations without softening them. Samuel met Kyle's eyes without flinching. "I understand, and I'm not afraid of hard work or hard living. I'm only afraid of losing Ruth, and I'm afraid of losing you. You're the only person left who cares if we live or die. That matters more than comfort or safety or any of those other things." The boy's voice was steady, carrying a conviction that could not be dismissed as childish fancy. Kyle studied Samuel's face for a long moment, seeing determination and maturity that should not exist in someone so young, but did, forged by tragedy and necessity. "If this is truly what you want, what both of you want, then I will speak to the authorities in Socorro. I will explain the situation and request permission to take responsibility for you. There are laws about such things, procedures that must be followed. It will not be simple, and there are no guarantees they will allow it. A Comanche warrior raising white children will seem strange to many, perhaps wrong to some. But I will try. This I promise." His words were measured but sincere. Samuel's face lit up with hope so bright it was almost painful to witness. "You mean it? You'll really try to keep us?" Kyle nodded slowly. "I will try. But Samuel, you must understand that even if the authorities allow it, the path ahead will be difficult. There will be people who judge us, who question our arrangement, who believe you and Ruth would be better off in a traditional home. You must be prepared for that. You must be strong enough to face it." His warning was necessary, tempering hope with reality. "I don't care what other people think," Samuel said fiercely. "They weren't there. They didn't save us, you did. That's all that matters." The boy's loyalty was absolute, the kind of loyalty that came not from obligation, but from genuine gratitude and affection. Kyle felt something warm settle in his chest, something he had not felt in years: purpose, connection, family. That night, the 3 of them sat around the fire together for the last time in the cave that had sheltered them. Kyle told stories of his people, of great hunts and brave warriors, of the time before the white settlers came in overwhelming numbers, when the Comanche had ruled the southern plains with strength and wisdom. Ruth and Samuel listened with rapt attention, asking questions, learning about a culture and history they had never been taught. Ruth, now strong enough to move about the cave with assistance, insisted on helping prepare the evening meal. She could not do much with her injured arm, but she sorted dried beans with her good hand, carefully removing small stones and debris, contributing what she could. Her determination to help, to not be merely a burden, reminded Cale of his daughter, who had always insisted on helping even when her small hands made tasks more difficult rather than easier. "Tell us about your daughter," Ruth said suddenly, looking up from her work. "What was she like?" The question caught Cale off guard, and for a moment he considered deflecting, changing the subject. But looking at Ruth's open, interested face, he found he wanted to share, wanted to keep his daughter's memory alive by speaking it aloud. "Ayasha was clever and brave," Cale began, his voice soft with remembrance. "She loved animals, even the dangerous ones. She would watch wolves from a distance and insist they were beautiful rather than frightening. She wanted to be a healer like her grandmother, learning plants and medicines before she could barely walk. She had her mother's laugh, bright and free, the kind of laugh that made others smile just hearing it. The memories flowed more easily than he expected, no longer bringing only pain, but also warmth. "She sounds wonderful," Ruth said quietly. "I wish I could have met her." Kyle nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "She would have liked you both," he finally managed. "She would have taken you as brother and sister without hesitation. She had a generous heart, always wanting to help anyone who was hurting. The comparison was not lost on him. The similarity between his lost daughter and these two children, fate had placed in his path." Samuel moved closer to Kyle, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. "Do you think our parents would approve of us staying with you?" he asked. "Do you think they would understand?" It was a question that carried the weight of guilt. The survivors' need to honor the dead by making choices they would support. Kyle considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. "Your parents gave their lives to protect you. Their last acts were to ensure you survived, to give you a chance at a future. I believe they would approve of any arrangement that keeps you safe, that allows you to grow and thrive. They wanted you to live, Samuel. They wanted you to have a good life. That is what any parent wants for their children." His words were carefully chosen, absolving the children of any guilt they might carry. Ruth leaned against Cale's other side, and he found himself with both children pressed close, seeking comfort and offering it in return. He wrapped an arm around each of them, an embrace that felt both foreign and natural, both frightening and right. For the first time in 8 years, Cale Stoneheart allowed himself to consider the possibility that his life might contain more than survival and solitude, that perhaps there was room for connection, for family, for love that did not end in loss, but continued forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. As the fire burned low and the children's breathing deepened into sleep, Cale stared into the dying flames and made his decision. He would fight for these children. He would navigate the bureaucracy and prejudice of the white man's world. He would do whatever was necessary to keep them safe and together. They had lost everything, but they did not have to lose each other. And neither did he. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Socorro, toward an uncertain future that might accept them or reject them. But whatever came, they would face it together. Cale had spent 8 years walking alone, and he was done. These children needed him, but he was beginning to understand that he needed them just as much. They reminded him of why survival mattered, why fighting was worthwhile, why life was more than just the absence of death. He settled more comfortably against the cave wall, the weight of the children against his sides, grounding him to the present moment, to the reality of connection and responsibility. Outside, the desert night sang its ancient song of wind and stars and endless space. But inside the cave, there was warmth and breath and the promise of tomorrow. And for now, that was enough. The journey to Socorro took 4 days, instead of the anticipated 3. Ruth's strength, though improving with each passing day, was not yet sufficient for long hours in the saddle, and Cale refused to push her fragile body beyond what it could safely endure. They traveled during the cooler hours of early morning and late evening. resting during the brutal midday heat under whatever sparse shade they could find in the desert. Rocky overhangs, or the twisted shadows of ancient juniper trees that seemed more dead than alive. Samuel proved himself an increasingly capable traveler, never once complaining, despite the obvious soreness and exhaustion that came from days spent in the saddle. He helped with all the camp duties without needing to be asked, gathering what little firewood could be found in the sparse landscape, fetching water from the occasional streams they crossed, and learning to properly hobble the horses each evening so they could graze without wandering off into the darkness. Kyle watched the boys' growing competence and confidence with quiet but genuine approval, recognizing the remarkable transformation taking place from terrified, traumatized child to increasingly capable young person who was beginning to understand and trust his own strength and resilience. On the third evening of their journey, they made camp beside a small creek that cut through dramatic red rock country, its water surprisingly clear and cold despite the lingering autumn warmth in the desert air. Ruth had regained enough strength to walk short distances without assistance, and she insisted with characteristic determination on helping prepare the evening meal, grinding corn between heavy stones, while Samuel cleaned and prepared the rabbits they had successfully snared that morning. The simple domesticity of the scene struck Kyle with unexpected and powerful force. This tableau of ordinary family life that he had long ago convinced himself was lost to him forever, never to be recovered or experienced again. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the endless sky in impossible shades of crimson and gold and deep purple that seemed too vivid and beautiful to be real, Ruth approached Kyle, where he sat performing his nightly ritual of carefully checking and cleaning all his weapons. She settled beside him with obvious care, still favoring her injured arm, though the healing was progressing remarkably well, and she watched his methodical, practiced movements in silence for several long minutes before finally gathering enough courage to speak the question that had been weighing heavily on her young mind. "When we get to Socorro tomorrow, what exactly will you tell them about us?" she asked, her voice carrying an uncertainty and fear that she tried desperately but unsuccessfully to hide. "Will you tell them we're just orphans who need any family willing to take us, or will you tell them something different, something more?" The carefully worded question revealed her deepest and most painful fear, that despite everything they had been through together over these past difficult days, despite the undeniable connection and bond they had built, Kyle might still ultimately choose to leave them in the care of complete strangers and return alone to his previous solitary existence in the wilderness. Kyle deliberately set down the rifle he had been meticulously cleaning and turned to face her fully and directly, understanding instinctively that this crucial moment required his complete attention, absolute honesty, and genuine emotional presence. "I will tell them the complete truth," he said with careful deliberation, choosing each word with precision and thought. "That I found 2 children desperately fleeing from dangerous men who had brutally murdered their parents and intended to sell them into slavery. That I eliminated that threat through necessary force. That you have no living relatives and require a legal guardian who can properly provide for your needs and ensure your safety and future. And then I will formally request permission to serve as that guardian myself, to take full legal responsibility for both your welfare and Samuel's, to raise you as if you were my own children by birth." His words were crystal clear and direct, offering no false hope, but equally offering no evasion or uncertainty. Ruth's eyes immediately widened and filled with tears that she tried desperately but completely unsuccessfully to blink away, her small hands beginning to tremble visibly in her lap. "You really truly mean it? You honestly want us to stay with you permanently? You want to keep us forever?" Her voice broke and cracked on those last emotional words, and Kyle felt something tighten almost painfully in his chest at witnessing the raw, naked hope and desperate need so clearly visible in her young, expressive face. He reached out slowly and placed a gentle but firm hand on her thin shoulder, his touch deliberately grounding and reassuring. "I mean every word," he confirmed with absolute certainty in his steady voice. But Ruth, you must clearly understand that the territorial authorities may very well refuse my request. A Comanche warrior who lives alone in the wilderness is not what most white people would consider a suitable or appropriate guardian for white children. They will likely believe you would be far better served living in a proper town with a traditional family who can provide a real house, regular formal schooling, church attendance every Sunday, and all the many things that white society considers absolutely necessary and proper for raising children correctly. They may view my way of life as fundamentally unsuitable or even dangerous for children, regardless of what you and Samuel actually want or need. I will argue as forcefully as I can for your expressed wishes and what I genuinely believe is in your best interests. But I cannot and will not guarantee the final outcome. The law does not always serve true justice, and prejudice runs deep and strong in many hearts throughout this territory. Honesty and integrity compelled him to prepare her realistically for the very real possibility of painful disappointment. Ruth sat in thoughtful silence for a long moment, carefully processing this difficult information with a seriousness and maturity that seemed far beyond her few years of life. Then she said, her voice gradually gaining strength and fierce determination, "If they try to separate us, if they attempt to take Samuel and me away from you and place us with complete strangers, we will fight them with everything we have. We absolutely will not let them split our family apart. We will run away together if we must, disappear into the wilderness where they can never find us." Her declaration was passionate and fierce, the solemn promise of a young child who had already lost absolutely everything once and was utterly determined never to lose what mattered most, ever again. Kyle shook his head firmly and decisively, his expression hardening with an unmistakable authority that allowed absolutely no room for argument or negotiation. "No, you will not run under any circumstances. Running would make you fugitives from the law, would transform legal authorities from potential protectors into active enemies hunting you. If the authorities ultimately rule against us, if they decide my guardianship is inappropriate or unsuitable, we will accept their decision calmly in that immediate moment and then work systematically within their established legal system to challenge and change it through proper channels. We will file formal appeals to higher authorities. We will submit careful petitions. We will do absolutely whatever the legal process allows and requires to fight their decision properly and effectively. But we will absolutely not make ourselves criminals by running. That path leads only and inevitably to more loss, more pain, more endless running with no resolution or safety. Do you clearly understand what I am telling you?" His intensity and conviction demanded full comprehension and genuine agreement, not merely passive acceptance. Ruth looked visibly uncertain and conflicted, clearly torn between her fierce determination to keep their new family together at any cost, and Cale's absolute authority and superior wisdom on how they must properly proceed. After a moment of internal struggle, she finally nodded with obvious reluctance, choosing to trust him, even though she distinctly did not like or agree with everything he was saying. "I understand what you are telling me, but I do not have to like it, and I do not have to think it is fair or right." Her complete honesty and strong spirit drew a slight but genuine smile from Cale, a rare expression that briefly transformed his usually severe and weathered features into something almost gentle and warm. "No," he agreed, his voice softening slightly with understanding and compassion. "You absolutely do not have to like it, and you are completely correct that it would not be fair or just if it happens. But you do need to trust me to handle this situation properly and effectively. I've lived many long years, survived countless serious challenges and dangers, successfully navigated situations and conflicts far more dangerous and complex than bureaucracy and social prejudice. Please let me do this my way, using my experience and knowledge. And I solemnly promise you with everything I am that I will fight with absolutely everything I have to keep our family together." Ruth nodded again, this time with noticeably more conviction and trust, and then leaned naturally against his solid side in a simple gesture of trust and genuine affection that Kyle was slowly but steadily learning to accept and welcome, rather than instinctively deflect. They finally reached Socorro late in the afternoon of the fourth day of travel. The settlement initially appearing as merely an indistinct smudge of buildings against the vast desert landscape, then gradually resolving into individual distinct structures as they drew steadily closer. The town was noticeably larger than Cale distinctly remembered from his last brief visit several years ago, apparently grown considerably more prosperous, from productive mining operations in the nearby mountains that brought steady streams of workers and all the various businesses and services that naturally supported them. The main street was wide and perpetually dusty, lined on both sides with wooden buildings that proclaimed their various commercial purposes through painted signs. A well-stocked general store, a saloon with traditional swinging doors, a solid bank with barred windows, a hotel featuring a second-story balcony, and most crucially for their purposes, a sheriff's office with a sturdy jail structure attached to its rear. People throughout the street stopped whatever they were doing to openly stare as the unusual trio rode slowly down the main thoroughfare, their immediate attention drawn by the highly unexpected and somewhat shocking sight of a clearly Comanche warrior accompanied by two obviously white children. Ongoing conversations paused abruptly mid-sentence, heads turned sharply to track their steady progress. Eyes followed them with expressions ranging from simple innocent curiosity to open suspicion to outright hostility and anger. Several men's hands moved instinctively toward their holstered weapons before their minds registered that Kyle posed no immediate or obvious threat to anyone. Cale ignored all the staring attention with long-practiced ease, his entire focus remaining on reaching the sheriff's office and beginning the difficult legal process that would ultimately determine all their collective futures. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office with fluid grace and immediately helped Ruth carefully down from her horse, noting with approval that she managed the dismount with minimal assistance despite her still healing arm. Samuel slid down quickly from his own mount and immediately moved close to Cale's side, his hand instinctively reaching out to grasp the warrior's arm, clearly seeking reassurance and protection in the intimidating face of so many staring strangers whose intentions and attitudes were completely unknown. The sheriff emerged from his office before they could knock or enter, a tall and imposing man who appeared to be in his mid-50s, with iron-grey hair and deeply experienced eyes that had clearly witnessed far too much violence over far too many years to be easily shocked by anything. He wore his badge with the casual but unmistakable authority of someone completely comfortable with both power and responsibility, someone who had clearly earned his position through demonstrated competence and integrity rather than mere politics. His right hand rested near, but deliberately not on his holstered pistol, maintaining a ready but not actively threatening posture. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, his voice carefully neutral and measuring. "I'm Sheriff Tom Brennan. Something tells me you folks have a serious story that needs telling." His immediate assessment was remarkably accurate, recognizing instantly that this was not any kind of casual social visit, but rather something far more significant. Kyle met the sheriff's steady gaze directly. "I am Cale Stoneheart, Comanche." Cale introduced himself with formal respect. "These children are Samuel and Ruth. 4 days ago, I found them in the canyon country south of here, desperately fleeing from slavers who had brutally murdered their parents and an entire wagon train of innocent families. Those slavers pursued them with clear intent to capture and sell them. I eliminated that threat through necessary force. We have come to report these serious crimes and ensure proper justice." His account was admirably concise, yet complete. Sheriff Brennan's entire expression shifted immediately from professional interest to sharp, focused attention. Slavers? Wagon train massacre? Those are extremely serious accusations. How many dead? Samuel spoke up before Cale could respond, his young voice surprisingly strong. 12 families in the wagon train, approximately 40 people total. They attacked at night and killed everyone except Ruth and me. 5 men total. Cale killed 4 of them and sent the 5th away to confess. Brennan looked down at Samuel with obvious sympathy. That's absolutely terrible for any child to witness, son. I'm genuinely sorry. He turned back to Kyle. Come inside, all of you. This will take considerable time to sort through properly. For the next 2 full hours, Kyle recounted absolutely everything in meticulous detail while the sheriff took careful notes. Samuel provided important corroboration. Ruth added what she could remember. Brennan listened intently, his expression growing progressively darker. I believe you completely, he finally said. We've heard troubling reports of slaver activity in this region. You've eliminated a significant threat. He paused meaningfully. What happens to the children now? I formally request permission to serve as their legal guardian, Kyle stated clearly. I can provide for them and ensure their safety and education. Brennan raised his eyebrows. A Comanche warrior raising white children will cause considerable controversy. Where do you currently live? In the wilderness, moving seasonally, Kyle admitted honestly. But I'm willing to adapt significantly, Brennan considered thoughtfully. There's a ranch north of here, belongs to widow Margaret Thorne. She desperately needs help. What if you worked that ranch in exchange for residence? It would satisfy all legal requirements while maintaining your independence. Kyle weighed the proposal carefully. Looking at Samuel and Ruth's hopeful faces, the decision became clear. I would be willing to discuss that arrangement seriously. 3 days later, they rode north with Sheriff Brennan to meet Margaret Thorne. The ranch was modest but clearly well maintained. Margaret was a capable woman in her 40s. The negotiations proved surprisingly straightforward. Margaret needed reliable help. Cale needed legitimacy. I don't care what people say, Margaret stated bluntly. I care about honest work. If you help me keep this ranch running, I don't care where you're from. Within 1 week, all legal documents were properly signed. Cale became the official guardian of Samuel and Ruth, with Brennan and Margaret as witnesses. They moved into a cabin on the property. The transition brought inevitable challenges. Some townspeople openly disapproved, but Margaret's fierce defense silenced most criticism. The children enrolled in school. Kyle proved excellent at ranch work. Ruth's arm healed completely over the following months. She blossomed beautifully, developing particular skill with horses. Samuel grew strong and capable, dividing time between school and ranch work effectively. 2 full years passed. On a cool autumn evening, the 3 sat together on their cabin porch, watching the familiar sunset. Ruth read aloud from a book, her voice confident and clear. Samuel repaired a saddle with practiced, capable hands. Kyle sat peacefully between them, no longer the isolated, solitary warrior, but the father he never expected to become again. Kyle, Ruth said softly, lowering her book to look directly at him. We never properly thanked you for absolutely everything, for saving our lives, for keeping us together, for making us a real family. Thank you. Her simple words carried profound depths of meaning. Kyle remained quiet for a long moment, then placed one hand gently on each of their shoulders. You saved me every bit as much as I saved you. I was slowly dying in my isolation. You reminded me why life truly matters, why connection is always worth the risk. You gave me renewed purpose when I believed I needed none. The debt is completely mutual. Samuel leaned comfortably against Cale's solid side. We're not going anywhere ever. This is home now. We're your family and you're ours, and nothing will change that. Kyle's voice carried absolute certainty. No, nothing will change that. We are family now and always. This I swear. As darkness gently settled and countless stars emerged overhead, they remained together in comfortable silence. They had survived unimaginable horror and somehow found not merely survival, but genuine joy. Not just safety, but deep love. Cale Stoneheart, who had once walked completely alone, believing solitude was survival, had learned profound truth. Survival was connection. Survival was family. Survival was choosing to love despite inevitable risk of loss. As he sat surrounded by the children who had become his own, he understood this was worth every moment of pain. The desert wind whispered through darkness, carrying promise of tomorrow. For the first time in 8 long years, Cale welcomed that promise with open heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.